When explaining too much backfires. Communication is one of the most important skills in life. Whether you are talking to friends, presenting an idea at work, or explaining something online, the way you communicate strongly affects how people perceive you. Many people believe that the more you explain, the clearer and smarter you will sound. So they add extra details, repeat their points, and keep clarifying the same idea again and again. On the surface, this feels like the responsible thing to do. But interestingly, psychology shows that over-explaining often has the opposite effect. Instead of making you look more confident or intelligent, it can actually make you appear uncertain, defensive, or insecure. When someone keeps adding unnecessary explanations, listeners often start wondering whether the speaker is trying too hard to justify themselves. The message becomes less powerful, even if the original idea was strong. Think about how confident people usually communicate. They tend to speak clearly, directly, and briefly. They make their point and move on without feeling the need to constantly prove themselves. Their communication feels calm and controlled. Because of this simplicity, people often perceive them as more trustworthy and self-assured. In this video, we are going to explore why over-explaining makes people look insecure, what psychological signals it sends to others, and how confident communicators avoid this habit. By the end, you will clearly understand why sometimes saying less actually makes you sound stronger and more confident. What over-explaining actually means. Before understanding why over-explaining creates a negative impression, it's important to first understand what over-explaining actually is. Over-explaining happens when someone gives far more information than the situation requires. Instead of delivering a clear message and stopping there, the person keeps adding extra details, justifications, and clarifications that are not really necessary for the listener to understand the point. For example, imagine someone arrives late to a meeting. A simple explanation would be, "Sorry, traffic was heavy." That statement is clear and sufficient. But an over-explainer might say something like, "Sorry I'm late, there was traffic on the highway, and I left my house at 9:05, but then there was construction near the bridge, and then my GPS changed the route, and I tried another road but that was also crowded." At that point, the explanation becomes unnecessarily long. Over-explaining usually comes from a desire to prevent misunderstanding. The person wants to make sure that no one misinterprets their actions or intentions. They believe that by giving more context, they are making the situation clearer. In reality, however, listeners rarely need that much information. Once the core message is understood, extra explanation only adds noise. In communication science, clarity is often linked with simplicity and precision. When someone keeps explaining beyond what is needed, the conversation loses efficiency and confidence. Instead of strengthening the message, the extra words can slowly weaken it, because the speaker starts sounding like they are trying too hard to justify themselves. The psychology behind over-explaining. To understand why people over-explain, we need to look at the psychology behind the behavior. In many cases, over-explaining is not really about communication at all. Instead, it is about seeking validation and avoiding negative judgment. When someone feels uncertain about how others might perceive them, they try to control the situation by providing more and more explanations. From a psychological perspective, this behavior is often connected to fear of being misunderstood. The brain tries to eliminate every possible doubt in the listener's mind. So the person keeps adding details, clarifications, and reassurances. However, the irony is that this attempt to appear trustworthy can unintentionally signal the opposite. Humans are very sensitive to social cues. When someone repeatedly justifies their actions or decisions, listeners subconsciously interpret it as a sign that the speaker might not fully trust their own position. Even if the explanation is logically correct, the excessive detail can trigger a perception that the person is unsure or defensive. This is why confident communicators often do the opposite. They present their point calmly and allow the message to stand on its own. Instead of trying to control every possible interpretation, they trust that the listener is capable of understanding the core idea. This trust in the message, and in themselves, creates a much stronger impression. How over-explaining signals insecurity. One of the main reasons over-explaining creates a negative impression is because of the signals it sends in social communication. Human conversations are not judged only by the words being spoken. People also interpret tone, timing, and behavioral patterns. When someone keeps explaining the same point repeatedly, listeners often start to interpret it as a sign of uncertainty or insecurity. Imagine two people giving the same explanation. The first person calmly states their point once and then moves on. The second person explains the same idea, then adds more details, then repeats the reasoning again to make sure everyone understands. Even though both individuals may be equally correct, the second person often appears less confident because they seem to be trying too hard to justify themselves. This happens because confident individuals usually behave as if their point does not require constant defense. They trust that their explanation is sufficient. Over-explaining, on the other hand, gives the impression that the speaker feels the need to constantly prove their credibility. Listeners subconsciously interpret this as a lack of self-assurance. In social psychology, this phenomenon relates to perceived confidence. People tend to associate concise communication with authority and clarity. When explanations become unnecessarily long, the message can start to feel less powerful, even if the information itself is accurate. The extra words unintentionally dilute the strength of the original point. Why people start justifying themselves too much. Another important reason people over-explain is the habit of constant self-justification. Many individuals feel that they must always defend their choices, actions, or opinions in order to be accepted by others. Instead of simply stating what they think or did, they immediately begin explaining why they did it and why it makes sense. This pattern often develops from social pressure. In many environments, such as school, workplaces, or family settings, people grow up feeling that they must constantly justify themselves to avoid criticism. Over time, this becomes an automatic communication style. Even in situations where no one is questioning them, they still feel the urge to explain every detail. The problem is that excessive justification can unintentionally make someone appear defensive. When a person keeps explaining why they did something, listeners may start wondering whether the action actually needs that much defense. The more the speaker tries to prove their reasoning, the more attention is drawn to the possibility that something might be wrong. Confident communicators approach situations differently. They understand that not every action requires a detailed explanation. Sometimes a simple statement is enough. When someone calmly states their decision without excessive justification, it sends a signal that they are comfortable with their choice and do not feel the need to constantly seek approval. How over-explaining weakens your message. Another major problem with over-explaining is that it can actually weaken the message you are trying to deliver. When someone communicates clearly and briefly, the main idea stands out. The listener can easily understand the point and remember it. But when too many details are added, the original message begins to lose its strength. Think of communication like a signal. The core idea is the signal, and unnecessary words are noise. When the signal is clear and simple, people grasp it quickly. But when too much noise surrounds it, the listener has to work harder to identify what really matters. This extra effort can make the explanation feel confusing or exhausting. Over-explaining can also cause people to lose interest. Human attention is limited, and most conversations rely on efficiency. If someone keeps expanding on a point that is already understood, listeners may mentally disengage. Instead of focusing on the important idea, they start waiting for the explanation to end. Strong communicators understand that effective messages are usually focused and direct. They prioritize clarity rather than quantity of words. By keeping explanations concise, they ensure that the core idea remains powerful and memorable.